Been great vibes. Diana, are you okay? Great, you're here. We're going to be talking about the Global South. So there's lots of discussions about the Global South. Oftentimes, it's how to engage feelings that, rightful feelings that they've been excluded from many of the conversations around climate finance, yet we are dependent in the Global North in particular on the health of their ecosystems for survival. So what does it mean to engage the Global South, to include the participants and players and people there? So we're going to be having a discussion about unlocking the global, unlocking financial inclusion, blockchain, and digital assets in the Global South. And Diana, when you want to join us up here, great. There you go. Yeah, I guess that's right here.
Hey, thanks everyone for sticking with us as we are getting closer to the end of the day with so many panels and conversations. So we're here to talk about the Global South, like David mentioned, Dave, and what blockchain and digital assets mean for inclusion of populations in an area of the world that has been more underrepresented generally and less economically developed, and how can we bring access to networks of productivity and exchange with this decentralized technology. And I'm joined here by Ilan and Tim. I'll let you introduce yourselves, and I'll start saying real quick, I'm Diana, Head of Research and Sustainability at GBBC, and it's a really great day to be with all of you today. So Ilan, introduce yourself.
Thank you, Diana. My name is Ilan Melendez. Coming from Costa Rica, Latin America, and I'm the regional lead of LACChain. I believe that maybe we can talk a little bit more about it in a bit.
Hi, everybody. My name is Tim, coming from Quito, Ecuador. We have a good LATAM crew here today. Yeah. I'm the managing partner and founder of Mercy Corps Ventures, a family of funds focused on climate adaptation and financial resilience in emerging markets. So we invest pre-seed, seed stage equity, but we also have a fund dedicated to grants that show proof of concept around the impact and commercial viability of emerging technologies. And we've done a bunch in the Web3 space, as well as climate tech as well.
It's so good to be with both of you, especially because we have some connections between both of you. But anyway, before my foray into blockchain, I used to work in international development, and I used to work for an organization called the Inter-American Development Bank. I was fascinated by the way that different countries could come together and form what the concept of a development bank is. And it's a concept that came about essentially in the post-World War II era, where basically all of the world decided that it is convenient both for developed and developing countries for there to be peace, and peace through commerce in many ways. And the development of poorer countries, essentially, is convenient not just for them, but also for the developed countries because of better trade relationships, better education, better products, and everything else. So, and in that space, there's, again, a lot of data. There's a lot of funds flowing from one place to another, and a lot of, sometimes even currency conversions. And basically, I'll start with Ilan. What is the Inter-American Development Bank doing today with the blockchain that you've been working on, LACChain, and tell us a little bit more about the projects that you've been working with.
Thank you, Diane. Basically, one of the motivations of Inter-American Development Bank is how to accelerate the inclusion in all our countries. When we are talking about inclusion, it's not only financial inclusion, it goes beyond than that. It could be education, healthcare, just to name a few of them. So since 2014, more or less, we started executing some projects using blockchain technology, and we realized that there were some challenges for governments, corporates, academia, to take advantage of this in those days, still new technology. And we realized that we needed to deploy kind of like a digital public good that countries can use and take advantage of. And around this to create an ecosystem. And now that is called today LACChain. So it is an infrastructure based on Hyperledger Besu protocol and around an ecosystem that helps governments, startups, companies, corporates and stuff to deploy use cases in compliance with the regulation of all these countries.
And Tim, you see a lot of different regions of the world in addition to Latin America, and you live in Ecuador. And apparently we overlapped at Notre Dame in undergrad too, so it's been great to meet you in person after many, many years. I don't know if you recognize me. I'm not sure if I recognize you from the dining hall, but anyway. You are working with funding of emerging countries and products and use cases in emerging countries, which is very interesting, where we see cases of leapfrogging of technology, or in many cases like low-hanging fruit. What is the real impact of investing in these emerging economies and the activity that you're seeing?
Yeah, definitely. So, we are by nature a family of funds focused on impact, but at the same time, we do think the next really exciting commercial investment opportunities are going to originate from the Global South for two primary reasons. Number one, the stresses and shocks of climate change are more felt in the Global South than anywhere in the U.S. or developed markets. And those stresses and shocks are well understood. The systems, the problems faced by entrepreneurs, by different actors in those places are really the raw materials to create really interesting solutions around this. And so when we reflect on like the rise of Silicon Savannah, East Africa and Kenya, there were converging factors back in the early 2000s that really led to that. The first was Vodafone, way ahead of its time, forming arguably the first at-scale mobile money wallet for feature phones at a time when mobile phone penetration was quite low, when at a time bandwidth and data were very expensive. But they really saw this future vision that everybody would have a feature phone in sub-Saharan Africa, and that mobile-based money would be the way people would interact with it. Second, about a year later, a major public-private partnership between the government of Kenya and Safaricom, the largest telco, installed the first undersea cable to Kenya. Again, a massive undertaking in the tens of billions of dollars. But these two things converged to lead to roughly a 95% adoption of mobile money within Kenya in something like 5 to 6 years. Far faster than most developed countries, and really laid the infrastructure then for an entire ecosystem of mobile-driven solutions and digital financial services. And so when we look at like where we're at today, I think that we already see Web3 and blockchain-based products, technologies, protocols greatly in use in the Global South because they solve particular pain points that those places face arguably more acutely than we face here in the Global North. Issues around foreign exchange, issues around access to US dollars for various reasons, cross-border settlements, what have you. It's quite telling. We've all seen probably a news headline around the cash reserves Tether was able to amass in the last quarter, which outperformed Goldman Sachs, despite the fact that Tether only has 50 employees versus 16,000 in Goldman Sachs. This is being used at a huge scale in different ways in emerging markets. And as a fund, when we started getting to Web3, I'd say about 3-4 years ago, we were witnessing this kind of user behavior and said there is a technology layer, an ecosystem being built here that we simply can't ignore. This is very likely the future of digital financial services in different ways and other types of products and services. The last thing I'll say is that when we look at the intersection of climate, which is why we're all here this week, and financial services, the building climate adaptation or any mitigation solutions for that matter inevitably requires financing. It needs to be embedded, it needs to be accessed, and it needs to have a variety of tools that allow somebody to be truly resistant to stresses and shocks or to respond and build back better. So we're talking risk transfer insurance, we're talking ability to build assets to withstand any sort of shock to their income, the ability to access credit, to invest ahead of time or to invest after a disaster. This entire ecosystem of financial services is really crucial for building adaptive capacity. and building out any sort of mitigation solutions like renewable energy. So we see the two as really intrinsically linked, even though typically I'd say the climate community and the financial inclusion communities are somewhat separate and trying to figure out how they work with each other.
Ilan, building off of what Tim said, what can you say about the importance of creating ecosystems of the right stakeholders, getting the right decision makers into the room to create agreement and basically create consensus and get collaboration to occur?
For me, when we are talking about ecosystem, it's kind of like a new approach in a way that we used to see business worldwide, or we normally see our operations. When we are trying to implement a project or in a solution, and think about the Inter-American Development Bank, like trying to implement a solution that will influence the lives of million people, right, or millions of them. So when we are struggling with what is the challenge, we try to look at the challenge for the whole population or a specific population. So thinking about the ecosystem is kind of like mandatory way, because we need to connect with the different stakeholders participating, somehow influencing decisions makers, or political things and technology or whatever it is. So one thing that we need to care about is, and especially in LACChain ecosystem, we want to connect, or we see ourselves as an ecosystem as a market maker somehow, in a way that we are able to connect the different solutions that startups are building or technology companies are building up with the real demand that in many cases that demand needs to be somehow teach to corporates, to governments. We need somehow to guide them in how to take advantage, in this case of blockchain, how to take advantage of these kind of initiatives. Because sometimes they are not too familiar or aware of how we can or how they can tackle different issues. So that is one of the things. When we are considering a solution, we are also considering, for example, what is the perspective from the educational point of view, from the regulation point of view, from the community or the end user point of view and stuff, which is something like a more broader view. I would like to give you a little bit of context of this. Just recently, we were implementing a solution in Belize, which is basically providing digital identity to sugarcane producers. They are somehow connected, or they were selling their sugarcane basically, or production to a specific major company and a corporate, but using different intermediaries, including transport services, some kind of regulators as well, and some other participants in this value chain. Through the digital identity, we had to connect all these participants, members of this value chain, and somehow provide them also with a benefit, an incentive, why they want to produce, why they want, or why they need to use this kind of platform. In these scenarios, for example, we have a clear vision. Like corporates, in most of the cases, are the ones making the clear message to their providers to use actually the right platform and stuff. So that leads me to one of the challenges that we're facing, which is standardization. In many scenarios, we need to build a kind of like a standardized platform that can be interoperable with the different systems or platform that every company will be using. And that is something that we also need to take care when we are thinking about an ecosystem approach. And in this scenario, in Belize's case, we are using tokens as well. Tokens to these farmers, tokens. We are paying the delivery companies with tokens too. And finally, the corporate is issuing those tokens through the money they have to pay one day. So that is part of this kind of like strategy that we have to see very, very broadly, and try to educate a lot in how this is going to be a shift in the mindset of how we operate.
Exactly. So I love, excuse me, I love how you are bringing up the point of it's broader than just financial inclusion and giving access to financial services to certain communities that are unbanked. We're talking about public services, education, digital wallets, identity, and essentially all aspects of civilization, how we operate, how we live as human beings on this earth, and on this earth also interact with the planet and climate. And to Tim, what can you say about the intersection between financial inclusion issues, climate issues, and the whole realm of everything that has to do with sustainability, climate, governance, social issues, and how and why should we be mindful of that integration?
Yeah, that's a big question. I mean, I think taking a step back, I mean, I think that when we look at the global south, well, first of all, we as capital stewards need to respect the wishes of where communities, where regions, where countries, where they want to go themselves. They've done different initiatives to try to set this up through SDGs, through national adaptation plans, and so forth. And so I think our role as stewards of capital, as partners and so forth, is to really listen to those voices and try to invest alongside them, through them, and so forth. I think when we look at that intersectionality of finance and climate, like I was saying before, for me, it's this translation challenge between where are the capital markets in the global north, the objectives that they have, self-interested or otherwise, and what are those objectives on the ground, and how do we bridge that with different types of financial products? And so I think when we look at like a problem set, say nature-based solutions, like a few of the panels today, there are a variety of technologies, DMRV, embedded finance through wallets, what have you, that can power that sector, give a bit more agency and autonomy, allow for co-creation of standards and methodologies like the folks at Regen Network and others are doing. And all those are part of the stack that's all coming together potentially to create kind of a new paradigm for how, again, climate and financial resilience to come together. I do think the area for me, when we zoom in on kind of the blockchain space particularly, is that I waver between excitement around what comes in the future, in the long term, like we're building essentially a new internet, of course. It's something that's been said many times. It's going to take time. There's lots of promising little pilots, but generally speaking, the urgency to actually see these get traction immediately is really there. And the populations we tend to work with and invest in, smallholder farmers, they do not have the time, luxury, capacity to play around with MetaMask, write down a seed phrase, all these different types of things that I think the last few waves of DeFi and so forth were expecting. I think we've made a lot of progress as a community in UI, UX, allowing us to really be product-centric with these stakeholders and try to take the promise of the technology, but often maybe sits more in the background, so that we can deliver products and services that solve immediate pain points that they have. And again, how that's characterized by individuals, populations, how those things come together is kind of the long-term challenge. Final thing I'll say is I think when we look at problems around climate in emerging markets, it's a multitude of systemic issues, and we can't ignore livelihoods as well. And so the challenge is that we might have a wonderful solution for getting credit to a farmer, but without risk transfer and insurance, really that farmer is not going to be resilient the next time a flood or a drought comes through. And so I think the opportunity in Web3 is that it could maybe more efficiently coordinate those services, but in the short term, when we really need to increase the velocity of what we're doing, we need these things to come together. I mean, I think that's what's wonderful and necessary of working with DFIs, development banks, with national governments. But I don't see the Web3 stack coming quite together as quickly as I would like it to see. I see lots of examples and pilots. Happy to share a few tangibly from our portfolio of things that work that haven't. More what I see now is that Web2 native products and solutions are looking at how to integrate blockchain on the back end to solve immediate pain points while we kind of look for this Web3 ecosystem to come together and achieve the promise that it has.
Yes. And why are we not where we want to be? Ilan, excuse me, I've been talking a lot. What do you think, Ilan, are the main pain points in terms of adoption of emerging technologies? You talked a lot about wallets and everything around that.
Yeah, I think we mentioned some of them. From my perspective, the biggest is actually, you mentioned before, the seed phrase and those kind of things. As long as we or we depend or we have that kind of security measures, it will be a very big technology barrier for most of the population in the world. Especially we are seeing, let's gonna put us in context, right? In Latin America, for example, we have a lot of people with very low literature, and it's important that we can provide tools that are not a barrier for them. I mean that can help them to integrate into the technology world, not only the devices itself. One thing that we have done, believe it or not, is that we made up like a physical digital wallet, let's say analog, and to facilitate this kind of integration with vulnerable populations. That is one of, probably from my perspective, the biggest challenge that we have. And the other challenge that we have, but in my day-to-day activities, kind of I absorb it as part of my own self, which is continue educating and separating in the discussions. When we are in discussion in a meeting, try to separate what is the crypto world with what is the use cases, the real world use cases that we can implement through the technology. That is something that for us is very important, especially because for some governments, the thinking or speaking about crypto is against the law in some cases, is not regulated, so they cannot do anything with that, or they don't know how, right? So it's really important for us to continue spreading this kind of message, try to differentiate what is the technology and what are the use cases that we have with that. And finally, one thing that I would like to propose is that through that technology, we can resolve, as mentioned before at the beginning, use cases from an ecosystem perspective. And normally in our, I think this is my own assumption, but it is something that I constantly see when I'm talking with corporates or governments. We normally think about the solutions that we are going to implement in our companies as a single or a standalone solution for me only. We hardly see solutions where we are going to interoperate with some other partners. And that's the beauty of blockchain. I mean, so we need to change our mindset a little bit on that.
Yes, especially as we talk about what has worked. So Tim, what can you tell us about lessons learned, use cases, examples that you've seen from what has worked despite the very real challenges in the global south?
Yeah, and I think, again, where we started from when we started exploring, I'd say, the blockchain crypto space was all of our staff in West Africa, and specifically Francophone Africa, were utilizing Tether to send money around. And so again, it was just trying to be, we would say, smart investors and not being stuck to our worldview of, like telco operators are going to rule the world with M-Pesa and it's going to take over the world, but what is actually happening on the ground? And so I think the success cases can't be understated. I mean, the original utilization of different forms of crypto for peer-to-peer payments, cross-border settlement, some who had the means of buying Bitcoin as kind of an asset accumulation strategy. Like, these are all things that organically happened in great part in the global south as ways for people to logically mitigate risks around foreign exchange, devaluation of currency, maybe access to money, access to quasi-dollars, things of that nature. Moving on in the next wave, what we saw was this intention around UI UX, and we started to see the rise of embedded wallets across sub-Saharan Africa. We saw the rise of products. We invested in two companies, Ajara and Bitmama, which were essentially creating centralized exchanges, but with a Web 2-like interface. One has a seed phrase, the other does not have a seed phrase. So really trying to be very, very user-centric. And what are the barriers? And each of these companies in our portfolio appeals to different ones who want self-custody and others who really could care less and just want a clean app experience like they have with mobile money. And that was the second phase, like let's remove some of these user experience barriers. And I think the winners from that wave in this blockchain space maybe let go of some of their philosophical issues with that and said, we're just going to create this experience because that's what's demanded. What we're seeing now, and this is getting to a few of our pilots, and it's all available on our website, mercycoreventures.com or .vc, if you'd like to see more. Ajara, one of our portfolio companies, had the idea of beyond just simple transactions, payments, remittances, what are savings products we can democratize access to that are responsible and right fit for users. Certainly they have users who are playing around with meme coins and maybe making money, probably losing money from that. But they really, truly believe the mass market in sub-Saharan Africa, where people with between $1 to $3 of savings a day, what would be a responsible product that they could give to them that was essentially risk-free, like a treasury bond. So they worked with the government of Cameroon, two other governments, to tokenize and fractionalize government bonds, which historically are extraordinarily low risk, provided an interest rate of 8 to 12%, and hitherto that point required a $10,000 to $15,000 minimum buy in order to access those. And so what this company was able to do was to allow anybody with just a few excess dollars to invest in these bonds, achieve an 8 to 15% yield, get those out any 3-6 month increments. And so really transformative savings product for a lot of these user groups with, at that point, had no access to banking services, no access to really any sort of savings accounts of any nature like that. And again, it was a responsible savings product for that user group, which would not result in a loss of principal. The other example I wanted to give with Bitmama, another one of our companies, we did a pilot with them to really try to understand where are they seeing the greatest use case for stablecoins. And the results for us were somewhat surprising in that they have a few million users across sub-Saharan Africa. What they were seeing, their power users were really these small MSMEs who are using or running between, say, $10,000 to $50,000 a month in cross-border transactions. They're using stablecoins for cross-border settlements, ending up being between 30 to 40% cheaper because usually they'd have to move between multiple currencies, number one. Number two, and more importantly, especially in places like Nigeria and others, it can be almost impossible to find US dollars on the economy, or it's really centralized in certain banks they might not have access to. And so what they saw was this massive uptick, especially starting during COVID, but continuing to today, where a lot of small mom and pop businesses were essentially using this to very quickly and cheaply settle payments across borders inter-Africa. That's a $98 billion a year and growing market, and really is core to these economies growing and these small businesses being successful and resilient. When we look forward, I think what makes us really excited is the combination of these wallets, of essentially these crypto-driven business-like accounts. We can move beyond simple payments, some of these early savings products, but suddenly we should have the ability for these businesses to have a whole suite of solutions, whether it's insurance, whether it's very simple, locking in their savings to achieve a pretty moderate rate of return, things we get used to with Coinbase here and other things, but really are inaccessible in a lot of these markets. So I think that's where we see the future moving. But again, we have a lot of other case studies. And again, we also have a number of ones where usually the product design or that user value proposition assumption was a little bit off. And so on our website, we share that all transparently to really try to push the sector ahead. So happy to talk through other examples in Q&A or refer to your website.
It's so interesting and even inspiring to see the sheer size of these markets just from the volume of the people that use these innovations that we don't think about every day, but there are a lot of people. So as we approach our final 2 minutes of this panel, for Ilan and Tim, any final key takeaways that you would like the audience to remember?
Yes. I mentioned about creating ecosystem, and we were talking a lot about creating ecosystem. Right now, we are launching an initiative that is called AgroWeb3, which is an idea to provide a digital wallet to millions of farmers in Latin America and the Caribbean. And we would like to invite you to participate in this kind of initiative. So yeah, that is a key message.
Yeah, well, in that spirit of collaboration, we have 4 different funds. We invest, we provide grants, proof of concept. We are pathologically collaborative, to borrow Gregory's term. And so very excited to collaborate. We truly believe in the long tail of Web3, but we're also very user-centric and want to rigorously test and kind of push things ahead by developing real-world use cases, whether they work or not. And so we will be launching another Crypto for Good request for proposals, I think in November. We just did one on climate tech and AI. And we'll be distributing some grants around that and more information on it. And we'll be doing another one on anticipatory action. So we've done quite a bit in the crypto space around how can you make payments ahead of disasters fast, cheap, and readily available. For every dollar provided before a disaster strikes, it results in a $5 to $15 savings on a monthly basis. There's no other bang for the buck or impact than anticipatory action. So we've done a few in the crypto space because we really believe, like insurance, blockchain can really power the institutions that hitherto are a bit slow to provide payouts, to extend money, and so forth. So very excited to partner around that and share that as well.
So pathologically collaborative, building ecosystems, and stay in touch with these 2 men and follow them and all the amazing things you're doing. Thank you, everyone.
Very much.